The entire village laughed at him the moment he arrived. His clothes were torn, his sandals broken, and dust covered his face like he didn't belong anywhere near them. Children mocked him. Men insulted him. Women avoided him. To them, he was just another poor stranger, someone to ignore, someone to laugh at, someone who didn't matter. But what they didn't know, was that every word, every look, every act of kindness, or cruelty, was being carefully watched. For 3 days, the man in torn clothes walked through their village, silently observing. He helped when no one else would. He asked politely when others were rude. He stayed calm when people disrespected him. And all the while, he was writing something down. Then, on the day the entire village gathered to welcome a powerful visitor, everything changed. Expensive cars arrived. Important officials stepped out. And the man they had mocked the most, was suddenly greeted with respect. In that moment, laughter turned into silence. Confidence turned into fear. And the truth they never expected hit them all at once. The poor man they had judged was the one testing them all along. In the quiet village of Ndalika, where dusty roads curved between clay houses and the rhythm of life followed the rising and setting sun, people believed they understood one another. It was a place where news traveled faster than the wind and judgments were formed even faster. In Ndalika, a person's worth was often measured not by their character, but by what they wore, where they lived, and how confidently they carried themselves. One late afternoon, as the golden light of the sun stretched across the village, a stranger appeared at its edge. He was an older man, his clothes worn and torn, his sandals nearly broken from long travel. Dust clung to his skin, and his appearance alone was enough to draw attention. Children noticed him first, their laughter echoing as they pointed from a distance. Soon, the adults began to look as well, their expressions shifting from curiosity to quiet judgment. Another wanderer, one man muttered, shaking his head. He looks like trouble, another added. The stranger, whose name was Kofi, walked slowly through the village, his eyes observing everything with calm awareness. Despite his appearance, there was something unusual about him, something composed, almost intentional, in the way he moved. He did not beg. He did not speak unnecessarily. He simply walked, as if searching for something that could not be seen on the surface. As he approached the marketplace, the reactions grew sharper. Women pulled their baskets closer, wary of his presence. Men watched him with narrowed eyes, their judgment already decided. A group of young men sitting near a wooden stall began to laugh openly. "Look at him," one of them said loudly. "Even the wind would be ashamed to wear those clothes." The others laughed, their voices cutting through the warm air. Kofi paused for a brief moment, his gaze moving toward them. But instead of reacting with anger or shame, he simply nodded slightly and continued walking. His calmness unsettled them more than any response could have. At the center of the marketplace stood a small shop owned by a woman named Amina. Unlike many in the village, Amina was known not only for her business sense but for her quiet kindness. She had built her shop through years of effort, earning respect without losing her sense of compassion. As Kofi approached, she looked up from her work. Their eyes met. For a moment, she saw what others had not, a quiet dignity beneath the worn exterior. "You look tired," she said gently. Kofi inclined his head slightly. "I've been walking for a long time." There was no pity in her expression, only understanding. Without hesitation, she reached for a small container of water and handed it to him. "Drink," she said. The act did not go unnoticed. Whispers began immediately. Why would she help someone like that? He'll bring trouble. She's too soft. Amina heard the whispers, but she did not respond to them. She simply continued her work, as if kindness required no explanation. Kofi drank the water slowly, then looked at her again. "Thank you," he said. His voice was calm, steady, different from what his appearance suggested. Before leaving, he reached into his worn clothing and pulled out a small object. It was simple, almost unremarkable, yet he held it with care. "Keep this," he said, placing it gently on her counter. Amina frowned slightly. "You don't have to give me anything." "It's not payment," Kofi replied. "It's a reminder." Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and walked away. The object remained on the counter. Amina looked at it, puzzled, but something about it felt significant. Meanwhile, across the village, the mocking continued. Some laughed at Kofi's appearance, others avoided him entirely. A few children followed him at a distance, mimicking his slow walk, turning him into a source of amusement. To them, he was nothing more than a poor, wandering man with no place in their world. But Kofi noticed everything. Every look, every whisper, every act of kindness, and every absence of it. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the village, he found a quiet place beneath a tree at the edge of Ndalika. There, he sat, his posture relaxed, his expression thoughtful. He reached into his clothing again, this time pulling out a small notebook. Inside were notes, observations written carefully, deliberately. Names, actions, reactions. The village thought they were watching a poor stranger pass through their lives. What they didn't know was that they were the ones being watched, tested, measured. And by the time the truth was revealed, their laughter would turn into something they had never expected. Regret. By the next morning, the stranger was no longer just a passing curiosity in Ndalika, he had become a quiet topic of discussion in nearly every corner of the village. People spoke about him while drawing water, while arranging goods in the marketplace, even while sharing meals. Some exaggerated his appearance, others added their own assumptions, but very few spoke of him with kindness. Kofi, however, moved through the village as if none of it touched him. He woke early beneath the tree where he had rested, brushing the dust from his clothes before beginning his slow walk back toward the center of Ndalika. The morning air was cool, and the village had not yet fully awakened, but even in those early hours, eyes followed him. A group of women passing by lowered their voices as he approached, their conversation shifting into cautious silence. "He's still here," one whispered. "People like him never leave quickly," another replied. Kofi continued walking, his expression unchanged. He stopped near a well where several villagers gathered water. A young boy struggled with a heavy bucket, his small hands slipping against the rope. The adults nearby noticed, but none moved to help. Some watched briefly before turning away, as if the effort required was not worth their time. Kofi stepped forward. Without a word, he took hold of the rope and helped the boy lift the bucket. The boy looked up, surprised, then smiled shyly. "Thank you," he said. Kofi nodded, his gaze gentle. From a distance, a man scoffed. "Even beggars want to look useful," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. A few people chuckled. Kofi said nothing. Instead, he reached into his worn clothing later that morning and quietly wrote something in his small notebook. The testing continued. As the day unfolded, Kofi placed himself in different situations, not to demand attention, but to observe reactions. At one point, he approached a food stall and asked politely if he could purchase a small portion of bread. The vendor looked him up and down, his expression tightening. "With what?" the vendor asked sharply. "You don't look like you have anything." "I can pay," Kofi replied calmly. But before he could reach for anything, the vendor waved him away dismissively. "I don't serve people like you. Go somewhere else." The words were harsh, final. People nearby heard the exchange. No one intervened. Kofi nodded once and walked away. Another note went into the notebook. Yet not everyone responded the same way. Later in the afternoon, he passed by a small group of children playing under a tree. One of them tripped and fell, scraping his knee against the ground. The others laughed at first, but Kofi stepped forward quickly, helping the child sit up and gently brushing the dirt from his skin. "Be careful," he said softly. The child nodded, his laughter fading into gratitude. An older woman watching from nearby shook her head disapprovingly. "You shouldn't touch children," she said sternly. "People will start to talk." Kofi looked at her, not with anger, but with quiet curiosity. "Is kindness something to be afraid of?" he asked. The woman had no answer. She simply turned away. Another note was written. Meanwhile, in the marketplace, Amina continued her work, though her thoughts occasionally drifted back to the strange object Kofi had left behind. She had examined it several times, a small, carefully crafted token, simple in design but made with precision. It didn't feel like something random. It felt intentional. When Kofi returned to her stall later that day, she greeted him with the same calm kindness. "You came back," she said. "I said I would stay for a while," he replied. She studied him for a moment, then offered him a piece of bread without hesitation. "You don't have to refuse help here," she added. Kofi accepted it with a slight nod. "Kindness is rare," he said quietly. Amina smiled faintly. "Not as rare as people think. Just, not always visible." Their exchange was simple, yet it stood in contrast to much of what had unfolded in the village. From a distance, some watched with disapproval. "She'll regret trusting him," one man said. "People like that always bring problems," another added. But Amina ignored them. For her, the measure of a person was not their clothes. And Kofi noticed that. As evening approached, the atmosphere in Ndalika shifted once more. The golden light returned, casting long shadows across the ground. People began to gather, conversations slowing as the day came to an end. Kofi returned to his spot beneath the tree. He opened his notebook again. The pages were no longer empty. They were filled with names, moments, choices, small actions that revealed larger truths. Who mocked? Who ignored? Who helped? Who judged? Each line written with quiet precision. The village had shown him something important. Not through grand gestures, but through ordinary moments. Because it is in those moments that people reveal who they truly are. As the sky darkened, Kofi closed the notebook slowly, his expression thoughtful. The testing was almost complete, and soon, the truth would no longer remain hidden. Because the man they saw as poor was about to reveal something that would change the way Ndalika saw itself forever. The third morning in Ndalika arrived with a strange stillness, as if the village itself sensed that something was about to change. The usual rhythm of voices, footsteps, and marketplace chatter was present, yet beneath it all lingered an unspoken tension. Kofi rose from beneath the tree as he had done before, but there was a different calm in his movements now, more deliberate, more certain. He walked toward the center of the village, where the elders had already begun gathering near the large baobab tree that served as the heart of community meetings. Word had spread that an important visitor was expected from the district council that day, someone wealthy and influential who had been searching for a village worthy of receiving support for a major development project. People whispered excitedly about what this could mean: new wells, better roads, perhaps even a school. No one imagined the stranger in torn clothes had anything to do with it. By mid-morning, the village square had filled with people. Men stood in small groups discussing possibilities, women adjusted their headscarves and whispered predictions, and children lingered nearby, drawn by the unusual sense of occasion. Amina stood outside her stall, her eyes moving through the crowd until they found Kofi standing quietly at the edge of the gathering. Again, he said nothing. Again, people stared. Some still looked at him with the same dismissive expressions as before. One of the young men who had mocked him on the first day laughed under his breath. Even now he comes to watch important people arrive, he said to his friends. As if he belongs here. The others smirked. Kofi remained silent. Then, just as the murmurs in the square began to rise, the distant sound of engines broke through the air. Several vehicles approached the village. Not the kind usually seen in Ndalika. They were polished, official, and unmistakably expensive. The crowd stirred. Dust lifted as the cars came to a stop near the square, and several sharply dressed officials stepped out. Their presence alone commanded attention, but it was what happened next that brought the entire village to a standstill. One of the officials looked around briefly. Then his gaze landed on Kofi. Immediately, he walked toward him. Not casually, not politely, respectfully, deeply respectfully. He bowed his head slightly before speaking. "Sir, everything is ready." Silence. Complete silence. The words seemed to freeze the air itself. The villagers stared, their expressions changing from confusion to disbelief. The same man they had mocked, the same stranger in torn clothes, was being addressed with honor. Kofi nodded calmly. "Good," he replied. And then, for the first time since arriving in the village, he stepped fully into the center of attention. The elders stood, visibly shaken. One of them stepped forward hesitantly. Who are you?" Kofi turned slowly, his eyes moving across the faces gathered before him, the faces that had laughed, ignored, whispered, and judged. Then he spoke. "My name is Kofi Mensah." The name alone caused a ripple through the crowd. Some recognized it instantly. A philanthropist, a wealthy landowner, a man known across the region for funding schools, clinics, and water systems in villages that demonstrated strong community values. The realization hit them all at once. This was not a poor wanderer. This was one of the most respected men in the district. Shock spread like fire through dry grass. The laughter that had once followed him now turned into silence heavy with regret. Kofi's voice remained calm. "I came here without title, without status, and without the protection of appearance." He paused, letting the words settle. "I wanted to see how this village treats those it believes have nothing." No one moved. No one spoke, because everyone already knew what he had seen. The mockery. The dismissal. The judgment. The cruelty hidden behind ordinary moments. Kofi slowly reached into his torn clothing and removed the small notebook. He held it up. "In these pages," he said, "I have written every act of kindness, and every act of pride." A visible unease moved through the crowd. Some lowered their eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably. The young men who had laughed now stood silent, unable to meet his gaze. The food vendor who had turned him away stepped back slightly, shame visible in his face. Then Kofi turned toward Amina. For the first time, a warmth entered his expression. But I also found something rare. He walked toward her stall. A woman who offered water without judgment. He placed the notebook gently on the counter beside the small token he had given her. A woman who saw dignity where others saw torn clothes. Amina looked at him, stunned but calm. Kofi turned back to the village. This village was being considered for a major development grant. A collective breath was held. But support is not built only on land or location. His voice deepened slightly. It is built on character. The word struck harder than any accusation. Because they were true. The villagers had failed the test they never knew they were taking. Their silence confirmed it. Then Kofi continued. Yet one act of kindness can still change a story. He looked again toward Amina. The shop, the water system, and the educational fund for this village. A pause will be placed under her leadership. Gasps spread through the crowd. Amina's eyes widened. Kofi nodded. Because leadership begins with humanity. The entire square stood frozen. The village that had laughed at torn clothes now stood face to face with the truth of its own pride. And in that moment, every whisper, every insult, every dismissive look came rushing back to them. This time, not as gossip, but as regret. Kofi stepped back toward the vehicles, his calm dignity untouched. Before leaving, he turned one final time. Never judge the value of a person by what they wear, he said. Sometimes the one you mock is the one measuring your heart. Then he entered the vehicle. And drove away, leaving behind a village forever changed. If you liked the video, please share it and subscribe the channel. If you want to earn online dollars, click the link below to create an account and start online earning in dollars now. Minimum deposit, $1. Minimum withdrawal, $7. Registration link in description.